Hello and welcome to Horseplayers Happy Hour. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale. So happy to be back with you for another week, coming to you from Walt and Whitman Brewing Company in Saratoga, one of my new favorite spots around here. They've got pizza, they've got beer, and they've got the racing on. What else do you really need at the end of the day? Matt Bernier away this week, though you will see him on a telecast with the guest that I'm about to introduce. You know him from so much different broadcasting in the realm of football, horse racing. He is one of the most recognizable faces and voices in the world of thoroughbred racing. He's also a member of the Beyer Speed Figure team. He is Randy Moss. Randy, welcome back to the In the Money airwaves. How are you, my friend?
How you doing, Pete? Good to see you again.
So you have a busy weekend ahead of you. You're going to be part of this broadcast on Saturday for this Win and You're In Alabama Stakes. And tell us what we can expect on the show. What hours are you guys going to be taking over the horse racing national TV broadcasting window, and what can we expect?
Well, this has been an interesting week for me, Peter. Let me just, in this pandemic, let me tell you exactly how my week has gone. So I flew from my home in Minneapolis to Denver, to the mountains of Colorado, where my nephew got married. That was a one-day trip. Then on Monday, I drove 12 hours with my wife, following my daughter to enroll her and move her into her dorm at the University of Oklahoma. And then from Oklahoma City, I flew up here to Connecticut, got in yesterday, from where we are doing the telecast on Saturday on NBC of the Alabama. NBC Sports, a lot of people don't know this. It used to be at 30 Rock in Manhattan. And about 5 years ago or so, it was moved to Stamford, Connecticut. They've got this gigantic campus and complex in Connecticut. So that's where we've been doing all the horse racing during COVID-19, is from the studio in Stamford, Connecticut. And lo and behold, I'm in a hotel room right now in Stamford, and here we are. Busy week.
Thank you so much for taking time out of a busy week to join us on the show. Maybe we should start off talking about the featured event of this weekend, the Grade 1 Alabama Stakes. Of course, it is a win and you're in race for the Breeders' Cup. And this is a race where I think in market terms, it's going to be dominated by a horse who I think some people are still thinking might end up putting on enough of a show here. She could end up in the starting gate for the Kentucky Derby. I'm not too sure about all that, but I certainly have been impressed by Swiss Skydiver's body of work. And Randy, we'll start with the simplest question. As a horse player, are you with Swiss Skydiver on Saturday or against her?
It's hard to be against her, really. Her last three races have been so awesome. In the Fantasy, where she stalked Venetian Harbor and won, with authority, and then the Santa Anita Oaks, where she just completely dominated a field wire to wire. And then last time they tried her against the boys, and she caught Art Collector in the Bluegrass, and she gave him a tussle. I mean, she wasn't good enough, but she finished second, and she was well ahead of the other horses behind her. So three fantastic efforts in a row. She doesn't catch the strongest Alabama field. Bob Baffert has a horse in there named Crystal Ball that was just beaten in a photo in the CCA Oaks, which was a pretty good race. But on paper, it looks to me like Swiss Skydiver is probably going to be 1-5 in a 7-horse field. And I think this is one of those races where you hook her up in exotics or in multi-race wagers, because it's going to be pretty tough to pick against her or bet against her in there.
That's how I saw it very much. She just looks like she might be at another level from her competition, even though she has some very intriguing competition on the day. And here's where I want to bring in your pace analysis expertise. I think there's sort of a facile reading of the last race where one might say, hey, she didn't really see out the trip last time. Maybe she's a little bit vulnerable going longer. As somebody who's looked into the sectionals in this race, what do you think about that theory?
Well, look, I've been saying this since I started handicapping 45 years ago. I think too many handicappers, Pete, look at a past performance line, such as Swiss Skydiver have, and I'm going to look over to the right here at my iPad with the PPs, and it shows her being head and head at the 8th pole with Art Collector, and then she's beaten by 3.5 lengths. And I think too many people look at that and they say, well, she was getting tired at 1 1/8 miles, and so, at 1 1/4 miles, she might be vulnerable. Okay. when in effect, it wasn't so much that she was getting tired, but she was getting outrun. She was running her race. You look at the numbers, any kind of numbers you want to look at, and she ran her usual race. I don't think it was a matter of her weakening to any great extent compared to what the other distances that she'd run. I think she just caught a better horse in Art Collector, and he was putting distance on her in the last part of the race because he's a superior horse. So in this field, at 1.25 miles, it really doesn't bother me. I mean, you've got a horse in here that I think is tailor-made for 1.25 miles, and Bonnie South, trained by Brad Cox. And if somehow the pace were to get out of control between Crystal Ball and Swiss Skydiver, which I don't think it will, then that could conceivably be an outcome. But some weird things I think would have to happen in that regard.
I don't disagree. For me, the biggest difference with Swiss Skydiver this time is I think she's just going to be able to go much slower early on. And you'll see that a lot. I'm a big believer, even on dirt, that horses do show you their ability very often in the way they see out and finish their races. And I think you're right. It's not like she finished all that badly anyway, but especially given those early exertions, I think if she's able to calm those down a little bit, you're going to see something very different during the race. So if we're right, if this is more or less of a penalty kick for Swiss Skydiver and she goes on and impresses, what are the chances you think the Connections will think about potentially going in a race like the Kentucky Derby as opposed to the Kentucky Oaks? Because you really do, when you think about it from a Connections point of view, you've got kind of an 800-pound gorilla waiting for you in either place in the relative forms of Tiz the Law and Gamine. Do you think Connections will think seriously about that?
I think you might have a 1,500-pound gorilla waiting for you in the Kentucky Derby in Tiz the Law. At least if they go to the Oaks with Gamine, they always have the possibility that maybe Gamine won't be quite as effective at 1 1/8, as the distances get a little bit longer, coming off the 7-furlong test stakes. Depending on whether Venetian Harbor goes in that race or not, there could be the possibility of a really fast pace that could compromise Gamine, and Swiss Skydiver could lay just a little bit behind that and maybe benefit from it. Going into the Kentucky Derby against Tiz the Law, to me, would be a mistake. I mean, I would hate to see them throw a hard-trying filly like this to the wolves in that spot. But, I mean, Kenny McPeek is known for outside-the-box thinking. He was actually considering running Swiss Skydiver at Royal Ascot instead of in the United States this summer. And he chose against that, but you saw he ran her in the Bluegrass. He had no qualms about that, and she ran well. So we'll see what happens if she wins very impressively. I think she should run in the Oaks.
Kenny McPeek, you mentioned, is going to be a guest a little bit later tonight on these very airwaves as part of the Cocktails and Conversation show. I'm going to be going here till about 5:15, 5:30, and then there'll be a little break and folks can come back and check Brittany and Nick and Kenny McPeek a little bit later. That's going to be fun. And I think he's a really interesting guy. I always enjoy talking to him. And I like the fact that he considers these out-of-the-box plans, but I think cooler heads are going to prevail in this spot. Let's talk about the Alabama quickly from a betting perspective. You did hint towards a horse at a price you might want to try to get up into the number here. What would you be thinking in terms of maybe how to structure an exacto or trifecta, or what pools do you see yourself participating in on Saturday?
Well, one thing that you see happening in just run-of-the-mill races, anywhere you want to look, is that when you get two horses like you see in the Alabama that figure to be the top two in terms of pace perspective, which in this case would be Swiss Skydiver and Crystal Ball, and one has a superior talent ability, what you see happens a lot is that a horse like Crystal Ball can be demoralized a little bit, right? Once Swiss Skydiver, and I'm assuming here, right? I'm just sort of playing out the race as I see it developing. Once Swiss Skydiver either stalks Baffert's filly and then just blows by her, or maybe just goes to the lead, and then Crystal Ball can't keep up with her and can't match her. Even though Crystal Ball might be the second best horse on paper in terms of ability, sometimes they'll just give up. And they'll say, all right, I can't beat this other horse, whatever. And then somebody comes from behind to pick up the pieces. And really, the only somebody in here that I can see is Bonnie South. I think she'll I think she'll benefit from the 1.25 miles. I think they'll probably take her back a little further than they did last time. Although she was in a fairly slow pace situation in the Ashland, I don't think you'll see her anywhere close to the lead on Saturday. There's another filly in the race that Todd Pletcher trains called Spice is Nice, who comes off a really fast on paper allowance win at Belmont Park, a 95 Beyer speed figure on June the 3rd. But there's a qualifier here. Even though that figure was fairly straightforward when you calculated it, Mark Hopkins does our speed figures for New York, it did represent a significant improvement for Spice is Nice and for some of the horses behind her. So you always view those races some with a little bit of skepticism until you see the horses in that race run back again and see how they perform next time out. Well, I think every horse in that race except Spice is Nice has come back to run again, and all of them have run lower numbers than they ran on that day. So I would be surprised if Spice is Nice is going to run back to that 95 number. I don't think that really represents a true number for her. And now she's, of course, getting into much deeper water going against horses like this. So I think Bonnie South would be the logical exotics play to hook up with Swiss Skydiver.
Great stuff, Randy. Thank you so much for your thoughts on this year's Alabama. I want to take another, a more general approach to asking you some questions. In a minute here, we're going to have an update on our contest that's going on. I probably should have mentioned this already. It had started before we came on air, so I didn't do you my usual hard sell when we come right on air. But we're going to be doing these shows for the foreseeable future on Thursday, and folks who want to participate can get involved. The contests have typically been starting at 3 p.m. over on horseplayers.com, and the proceeds all go to two really important equine charities, the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance and the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. So we encourage folks to get involved in future weeks, and we'll be doing a leaderboard update. Looks like there are some fun stories, some very recognizable names up on that leaderboard, and we'll get to them in a minute. You mentioned that phenomenon of, and I love doing it too, DRF's formulator makes it very easy to go in and look at a given figure and see what the horses did coming out of that race. Sometimes you'll see where they all improve. Sometimes, as in the case of the race you were referencing, the figures all back up a little bit. And I agree with you. It can give you a truer window into the number. As a figure maker yourself, what's your reaction when that happens to a figure you have made? Do you have an inclination to go back in and adjust the figure that may have been shown to be not the most accurate level of the abilities, or do you just chalk it up to the fact that there were circumstances that day that allowed that figure to be what it is, and just take that you have and move forward with it?
So we can get a little inside baseball here since we're on this show. It depends on the circumstance. Okay. I'm pretty conservative with stuff like that. As a matter of fact, within our Beyer speed figure team, Andy Beyer has nicknamed me Scalia because I'm a strict constitutionalist when it comes to the numbers. You know, for example, in the Oaklawn Park allowance race where Gamine defeated Speech, okay, it came up a 98 Beyer speed figure, and I won't say who, other people on our Beyer speed figure team said there's no way that allowance 3-year-old fillies were going to be running a 98. I went back, I timed the race on my video software. The time was accurate, right? The track variant was dead solid. So there was no reason not to suspect that the time was accurate, and the fig was accurate. So I lobbied heavily and won for it being kept as a 98 Beyer speed figure. And now you see what's happened with Gamine and Speech subsequently, right? So when you see a race, though, that the horses come back out of it and don't run well, I think as a fig maker, I ask myself one primary question. Was there a reason to believe going in that the race could be suspicious in any way? For example, we see sometimes making figures where the racetrack speed changes during the middle of the day. It can be a weather phenomenon. It can rain. It can be track maintenance sometimes has changed, but sometimes you'll see a definite switch from one track speed to the next track speed in the middle of the card, fast track all the way through, but it's very definitive. But you have a borderline race. Like, let's say you're at Oaklawn Park where they have no turf course. It makes it easier to explain. And you've got a 9-race card, and you judge that after the 4th race, the racetrack got slower. Okay, but the 4th race is on the borderline. And let's suppose it was a maiden race. And it's kind of hard to make a number for the 4th race because you have a lot of first-time starters and a lot of inexperienced horses. So you got to make a judgment call. Okay, does that race belong in the early race sample or does it belong in the late race sample? And you tag it in the system, in our computer system, and you watch how those horses come back and run subsequently. And occasionally you'll have to go back and change it. The horses are better than we thought. They belong in the slower track quadrant, right? And in that case, we'll go back and change them. But if there's no other real ironclad evidence, then I would say what you just said. Sometimes it can be circumstances, and it's best just to leave it alone.
That's a great answer and a terrific window into both the art and science of figure making. How long have you been making figures for, and how did you get into it?
Okay. Cliff's Notes version, Peter. I was born and raised in Hot Springs, Arkansas. I grew up as a kid with Bob Holthus living on one side of me, another Midwestern trainer, Jim Garroot, on the other side of me. Right down the street, David Vance, trainer. Right down the street, the late Bob Irwin, who worked for Marion Van Berg forever and is in the Michigan Racing Hall of Fame. A whole neighborhood of trainers and their kids. And so I grew up around the sport. And I actually began handicapping for the major Arkansas newspaper when I was 13 years old in somebody else's name. They didn't want anyone to know that a 13-year-old was dispensing handicapping advice. So I was ghostwriting a column, handicapping, all the way through college. And I was doing my own, I was a kind of a child prodigy. I've gotten dumber each progressive year since then. And I was, a big ERA calculator baseball fan. That was my sport. And I was a real numbers guy. And I had developed my own sort of speed figure system going in. And then Picking Winners came out. And I started using that in conjunction with what I was doing. And then I met Andy Beyer at the 1980 Kentucky Derby. And he knew I was doing Oaklawn figures. And we compared notes. And I completely merged my system at his urging to be exactly the same as his, and we began collaborating on numbers exactly 40 years ago. And I'm, still with the Beyer Speed Figure team. So, this has been a fantasy of a lot of horse players, Peter. You can imagine at a racetrack like Oaklawn Park, which in the early 1980s was blowing and going. It was unbelievable. They handled $3 million a day on track, and they didn't even run on Sunday. Being the only guy, essentially the only guy, who was making figures, who was making speed figures on the races. And I was a public handicapper. They thought I was some kind of savant because nobody else had numbers, right? And horses would be 10-1 and 15-1 in the morning line, and I'd have them on top, and I'd make them 5-2, and they'd go off 3-1. And people were like, who is this guy? It's because of the numbers. So I've been making numbers for a long, long time. Including pace figures and everything else. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I do want to talk to you a little bit about pace figures because I still feel like that's an underappreciated aspect of figure making, especially on the turf, where it feels like sometimes on the turf, the numbers, the published numbers, and I'm not just picking on any particular figure maker, but very often the published figures seem almost like form figures where there's a lot of projection going on, where when you look at the pace figures, it can sometimes tell a more complete story of a race. When they go so slow as they go in so many of these turf races, my logic is there's only so fast they can come home. And looking at pace figures, especially late pace figures, can sometimes tell more of a story. At what point did you start incorporating pace into the equation? Because, of course, Andy famously, back in the day, and has changed his mind about this, but he wasn't too convinced about the use of pace figures many moons ago. And at that time, with what the market was, you probably didn't have to be. But as the market's gotten tougher and tougher, I do feel like it's brought the pace figures into play. Were you as skeptical about them as he was, and how did you start getting involved with them?
I'd say, Peter, I probably started really incorporating them seriously into my game about 30 years ago, the late 1980s. When I started seeing pace as a very strong component of what other people would consider class.
Great point.
There are people who consider themselves class handicappers, and they'll point out that horses that can win impressively for $10,000 claiming, and they're stepped up to $25,000 claiming, won't run the same numbers because they're outclassed. Well, usually, I think that's primarily a factor of pace. You have more speed horses in a $25,000 race going at a faster clip than you do a $10,000 race. The trips are usually completely different because of that. And that's when I really started developing pace figures, probably like in the late 1980s at my two hangouts, Oaklawn Park and Louisiana Downs back then.
That's a great observation. You hear a lot of times people talk about the drop from maiden special weight to maiden claiming. Well, why is that so potent? I think it's because of pace.
To me, that's the single biggest profitable use of pace figures. Is you can have a horse in a maiden special weight race who can have a line like 4th by 2, 5th by 4.5, 8th by 6, 9th by 12. Okay, but if that half-mile pace figure is superior to the other horses he's running against, now that he's dropped down to maiden 15 or maiden 25 or even maiden $35,000 claiming, a lot of times that can be hidden on the odds board. Now, people, as most of our watchers know here, horse players have gotten savvier and savvier about things like that as the years have progressed. But you can occasionally still find some nuggets of horses that are undervalued on that class drop from maiden special weight to maiden claiming if the pace figures point out that they have an advantage.
That's a great point. It's one of those areas where I still feel like doing the old school work can find you a little bit of an edge. Things like the second time starter that has a reason to improve that maybe the computer piece of the market doesn't. These are the kind of things that as horse players we have to grab onto. I have a very random hot springs question for you that I didn't prep before at all, so I may bamboozle you with this one. But are you familiar? Oh, definitely. We've got it. I'm glad to see you're taking this happy hour thing as seriously as I am.
Okay.
There's a new book about the history of hot springs by a guy named David Hill, who's been on the show, who's a friend going back, and gets into the hidden history of this amazing place. I was curious if you've read the book and sort of what your perspective is as a Hot Springs native about the amazing and wild history of this town that in some ways was Las Vegas before Las Vegas, where spring training originated. I'm just curious to get a little bit of your take about your native town.
Fascinating place to grow up, first of all. Because of the tourism industry, you have a town of 30,000 that really it's in Arkansas, but it's a little bit more sophisticated than most Arkansas towns of 30,000 would be. It's got the big racetrack. But I haven't read his book specifically, but I know a lot about the historic background of Hot Springs from spring training, where Babe Ruth and Cy Young and Honus Wagner and Rogers Hornsby and all those guys used to turn out. Rogers Hornsby, Baseball Hall of Famer, actually had a baseball academy based in Hot Springs, Arkansas, that he ran with Dizzy Dean, who was a native of Arkansas.
Gas House Gang.
There is a picture that is hanging in the Oaklawn executive offices of Babe Ruth on a horse at Oaklawn Park. It was kind of like a promotional picture, and the Babe
horse
apparently up for anything. He was probably 3 sheets to the wind that day. And so they put him up on a horse, and there he is. It was probably a stable pony or something like that, but it was a horse with 4 legs, and he was on it on the Oaklawn Park racing surface. And he was a big fan of the races back in the day. And the gangster element of it was huge. They called it Little Chicago. It was a city in which the different warring crime gangs would call a truce. When they came to Hot Springs, they were okay with each other, right? They weren't trying to rub each other out. or rub each other off. And they were protected from the federal government by a city government in Hot Springs that was very pro-organized crime. There was a mayor for years and years named Mayor Leo P. McLaughlin, who was really instrumental in the history of Oaklawn Park. Mayor McLaughlin would protect these guys. And there still exists, Peter, a network of tunnels that goes underneath Bathhouse Row in downtown Hot Springs and connects to what were the casinos at the time and the Arlington Hotel, where Al Capone has a suite that's still called the Capone Suite. And when the mayor and the local officials in Hot Springs got word that there might be a federal raid with FBI, et cetera, they would tip off the gangsters. They would head down through the secret tunnels underneath downtown Hot Springs, and they would hide out down there until the coast was clear.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So yeah, there are all sorts of stories about old. And my father actually watched. I guess this was one particular incident in which the truce didn't hold, but he watched someone actually get rubbed up.
Oh my God!
In downtown Hot Springs.
That is traumatic stuff.
And there's an old famous gangster by the name of Oni Madden.
He's a big character in the book.
Okay, big character in the book. He retired and passed away in Hot Springs, where he was protected for a long time. And after he died, my father happened to be walking by. He had heard that he had died, and they went by the house. And there were boxes and boxes and boxes of his belongings that were just set out on the street as garbage. And so my father and one of his friends went through one of the boxes, and there was a gigantic box filled with photos of Oni Madden, of old gangsters, of his entire life. And my father didn't take it. He left it sitting there, and he regretted to the day he died that he didn't take that box of Oni Madden memorabilia and photos and keep it.
That's a museum worthy pieces. As you're talking, I'm realizing just how much I missed getting to go to Hot Springs this year. And who knows, hopefully it'll be on the calendar. Really, they had a fantastic meet, I thought. It was just, such a salve for horse players. I love the fact that racing was able to operate in this safe fashion throughout the pandemic. Were you, you're obviously a huge sports person all the way around. What did it mean to you to have racing over the course of those few months when there was nothing else cooking?
Oh, it meant a lot. I think it meant a lot to a lot of sports fans. And I think there are a lot of fans, we'll see if it takes, I hope it does, who just became fans because racing was the only game in town, not just from a gambling perspective, but from watching spectator perspective. And I was very proud of Oaklawn. As a guy who was born and raised in Hot Springs, used to sneak into the racetrack, or at least try to sneak in when I was a little kid. They had a very strict age 16 policy back then, and Bob Holthus actually used to sneak me in quite a bit. Yeah. Hey, you have time for a quick story?
Of course.
Okay.
I'm gonna let you go soon because I promised I would, but no good deed goes unpunished around here. We're having you back for another show soon, but okay. hit us with this story.
12-year-old birthday, Arkansas Derby Day. Bob Holthus had a horse named Our Trade Winds running in the Arkansas Derby. And for my birthday, he was going to get me into the racetrack to watch his horse run in the Arkansas Derby. I was 12 going on 9. I was tiny. I was just little skinny kid. And my parents were like, there's no way. 16 years old, I've got cousins that would put fake mustaches and stack shoes and everything. And there's no way they could get in. They were older than me. And Bob said, don't worry about it. I got it covered. Meet me in front of the racetrack before the races start. So we picked a time. Bob met me. He took me around. He introduced me to this little guy. I didn't know who he was. His name was Joe Crane. And so he said, follow Joe. He's going to get you into the racetrack. So they took me around the side entrance to the apron, not the main entrance in front of the track. And there was a guard shack. And the guard put his hand out and stopped me and said, sir, I'm sorry, this kid can't come in. He's clearly not 16 years old. And this man pulls out his badge and says, I'm Joe Crane. I'm the Hot Springs Chief of Police. He's with me. And the guy said, I don't care who he is. He's not 16 years old. He's not coming in the racetrack. We have laws. And Joe Crane said, buddy, let me tell you something. He said, I know about laws. I'm the Chief of Police. There's been a crime committed. Okay. The suspect is, I have reason to believe, is in the racetrack. This young man is the only witness to the crime. And if you don't let him in, I'm going to arrest you right now for obstruction of justice. And so the guy said, what the hell? Just go ahead. Go ahead and go in the racetrack. All right.
Oh,
so
tremendous.
Now fast forward maybe 10 years ago. I'm at Oaklawn, and this little doddering old man comes up to me in the grandstand and says, Randy Moss. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, I know you don't know who I am. This name won't mean anything to you. He said, my name's Joe Crane. And I said, you son of a bitch. Do I know you? Of course I know you. I've told this story 1,000 times. And he had got this big grin on his face, and he said, I've told the story too. My first time inside a racetrack.
It is just the absolute best. I'm working on this book that story. I'm afraid you've really done it now. Now you've really set yourself up to have your brain picked by me. The book is going to be called Easy Game, with heavy irony, of course, but it's going to be called Easy Game, and it's going to be conversations with successful horse players. And part of the gimmick is going to be getting successful horse players to tell the story of their most memorable days at the racetrack. I can't imagine you've had a more memorable one since, just based on that.
I had some pretty good pick sixes with my pick six partner that were pretty memorable, but at one point we had the all-time leading payoff in the state of Oklahoma and the state of Louisiana at the same time, but those have since been broken. Those were pretty memorable days as well, but the Joe Crane thing is probably number one on my list.
That's awesome. Well, we'll tell them all, and we'll get into all this stuff and more biographical stuff. Now, we don't usually give guests on this show parting gifts, but I will. I really want to hear your opinion of this David Hill book, so I'm going to.
Nice.
We'll sort it out offline, and I'll make sure you get a copy. I want to hear. He's a native too, and from what my reading ability, he's clearly captured something. But the opinion of another native is definitely one that I want to hear. Randy Moss, thank you so much for all your time today. Really, really enjoyed it. And the bad news is I'll be bothering you again very soon.
Okay, good for it. Have a happy hour. All right.
Cheers, my friend.
Bye-bye.
Good stuff. How great was that? That story just absolutely mind-blowing. Now, I didn't prep with producer Craig to know if we have our next guest ready, but I'm just going to take a shot that she's going to be appearing in my screen any minute. She's already been responsible for one of the great moments in Horseplayer Happy Hour history, which impromptu called a race. And let's just say she did a little bit better than when Jonathan Kinchin attempted to call a race impromptu on these airwaves. Producer Craig, DJ Unstable, do we have Michelle ready to go here? Michelle, are you there? Is that you?
I'm here.
What's happening? How are you?
Hanging out. Not too bad.
Excellent. It's great to have you back on the air. How have you been enjoying your summer so far?
Oh, well, it's been a summer. It was a little stagnant to get started here at Del Mar, but last week was pretty good. So hopefully we'll get to close out with a nice, big, sweeping move.
Well, let's talk about, I think the move has begun based on your family connections and a performance from last weekend. I want you to talk about this horse a little bit.
Yeah, Weston went really, really well. He was a horse that one of Ryan's owners had picked up at the sale last year. Sorry about the helicopters. I'm outside at Del Mar, and there's like a crazy amount of helicopters all of a sudden flying.
We love the ambient noise. We love it. We had the cafe music behind me from right here at Walton Whitman Brewing before. Ambient noise from Randy's hotel. The helicopters come right in. Hopefully everything's okay out there. I think I can hear some waves crashing in the background too, but that might just be my imagination.
No, you can almost hear the shark splashing from where I'm at right now. But so we broke him at our little farm in Whittier, and he was a complete nightmare, for sure. I was like, what is wrong with this horse? And when we tried to saddle him, he literally looked at us and then laid down. And we're like, no, get up. And he was not having it. He was the opposite of everything that you needed. But when he got to the track, after a couple of works, he really started to figure out his job and come to appreciate it. He's still kind of a hard ass. Like, he doesn't like to be loved and petted on. When I go down the barn and I give pets and kisses. He just gives me like an evil eye and an ear pin. So he doesn't really like to participate in any of that. But at least he brings it on the racetrack.
Well, that's for sure. And horses, just like, humans, it's different personalities. And
Yes.
you'll find lovable horses that run their eyeballs out, and you'll find those tough sons of guns who just want to get down on their belly and run. Michelle, I've just been informed the poor viewers are now, I think, just seeing me.
Seeing you? Yeah, I don't see
you. You need to
at
turn
all.
your camera. Can you turn your camera on? I want to see you.
Is my camera not on?
I'm not.
Let's see. Oh, that's all me right there.
There you go. Professional broadcaster. There she is. That's
Ta-da!
much better. That's much better. Oh, and Del Mar's right. This is fantastic. Oh, this is fantastic.
Okay. Oh, wrong way. That's the bathrooms. You don't want to see that.
Yeah, that's
there
not
we
as
go.
good
There's
a view.
Del
That's
Mar.
You're a smiling face, the plant behind you. I just got like a pang in my heart because I want to be out there. I started this new tradition. I used to do Del Mar whichever week Saratoga wasn't open. So some years it would be the first week, some years it would be the last week. They both had their advantages. Then I've replaced that in recent years, going out, making sure to get to the Bing Crosby meeting. That's probably not going to happen this year. We'll keep fingers crossed. Who knows? But what have the vibes been like at Del Mar? I just want to talk about what the atmosphere has been.
I'll be honest with you. I haven't been able to go to the races at all. They just are now saying that any owner can come as long as you make an appointment with the TOC. But at the beginning, there was no one. And then it was 2 owners per horse. And then it was 4 owners per horse. But I have my 2 kids down here. And if we have a horse running, well, my husband's with the horse. So I have my kids and they're not allowed. So I have not been able to go to the races at all. I do the Beach Boss show, and I go to Del Mar, and I sit right on the veranda, so overlooking the paddock. And it actually feels relatively normal because it's the morning hours with a ton of schoolers coming through, and all that's, pretty kind of like day in, day out routine. And I know in the afternoon, Ryan said that as the weeks have gone on and they've let more people come, it started to feel more normal, but it's still that eerie sensation. And I'm sure it's similar to when we were at Santa Anita and there was 50 people on track and you're used to, a lot more. And you can definitely hear the trainers that root down the stretch when they're there, because you hear like the one trainer yelling or, you hear Peter Miller screaming at the jockey or Richie Beltis slapping his leg.
That's great detail. Orlando Noda has become famous in Saratoga for his rooting. Apparently, even houses on the other side of the track can hear his roots. They're so loud. He's making quite a name for himself, and that's and he's had plenty to root for at this meet. I'll be honest, I probably could go via either Friends with Horses or media, the way it's worked. They're doing it in a very safe way, but there is a way to do it. I've been a little scared to go. In the sense that I'm worried it might make me feel more acutely what I'm missing this summer. Maybe that's the wrong attitude, but I've been kind of happy. I've been coming here to Walton Whitman a lot. They have the races on all the time. Beer and pizza and racing makes me very happy. But I certainly do miss it. And I definitely felt a pang on Travers Day. Travers Day was the first day I actually felt like, I'd say I felt actively sad about just not. We typically have our big party, and it was hard to miss. I imagine you're keeping busy enough that those pangs of sadness are staying away.
It's actually really sad. I was really lucky this morning. My mom was here to watch my kids, so I was able to go on the backside and just help. I'm like, give me a horse and let me hot walk. I just needed to be at the barn. I have missed being there. Before I was there every single day, and now because the kids can't come, I'm really limited to it. So I feel that pang that you feel, the sadness. In fact, on the weekends that we have horses, and a lot of times I go back up home to where I live, close to Santa Anita, because I don't want to just be here and watch the races on my phone.
That's amazing. I'm going to give a quick leaderboard update. We have this contest. You're a perfect guest for the contest show, Michelle, because, of course, when we did the original Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation fundraiser, you actually ended up taking the whole thing down. So we haven't seen your name on the leaderboard recently. We've got to get you back in action.
I don't think I've played in months now. I think I need to jump back in there. I think the last contest I played was pre-COVID.
Yeah, we got to get you. I want to see your name on the leaderboard. But right now, we do have some other familiar names on the leaderboard. So today we had 58 entries, folks. I should have let them know what they were playing for before now. But they're looking to win $179 entries into Saturday's Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge qualifier. So with 58 entries, that means the top 5 are going to go. Right now, our overall leader is Caleb Knight with 77.10, and these 2 races at Saratoga left to play. In second place, Peter Rotundo Sr., who you've been keeping very busy. He's gotten himself going in the podcast world, and of course, folks know him from Horseplayers and the work he did for New York OTB back in the day, and just a real Saratoga character. Great to see him up there. Bob Schreiter in third. Sam Stinson, a real friend of the show and somebody we've interacted with a lot, in fourth place. And then another in the money regular in fifth, Matt Vagvolgi, right now with 51.70. Then there's a gap of 7 back to 6th place, and Michael Webb. 2 races left to go in the contest, and folks will get a chance to win their way in. Now, have you ever participated in one of these big live money contests, or do you prefer the mythical formats?
No, I prefer the mythical format for sure. I am too poor to do a bunch of live money contests.
That's why you qualify in. You get in for sure money.
And because they're usually on the weekends and I'm working, so I have to always play in pick and praise too, and I feel like that does hurt, especially if there's 2-year-old races or something on the card, because in those aspects I would want to play live horses that I could look at and then and make choices at those times. And because me being at work really makes me unable to be like, oh, hold on, I can't talk about this race, I got to log in and make my bets, so it just kind of excludes me from a lot of those, when I would feel like that would be a great aspect, is to be able to play a lot of those races when I can see the horses live. So I have to stick to free, and I have to stick to pick and pray, but I try to tend towards the free or the little bit cheaper anyways.
Let's talk about looking at horses in the paddock. This is a topic that I feel like, maybe it's ironic that I now want to talk about it, that so many people can't go to the races, but I just feel like the more we learn about these betting markets and how much of them are comprised of people betting based on computer information and a lot of money, I feel like looking at horses in the paddock is at once the oldest way to pick horses and also the newest frontier. For you, how did your skill of looking at horses in the paddock develop, and what advice would you give to people looking to develop that skill?
So, I started off with horses when I was younger, so horses have always been a part of, my background. But when I got into horse racing, I didn't even think to kind of tie those two things together at first. So it wasn't until I started working for TVG and I would just randomly be like, that horse looks so good. And they're like, it's 100-1. And then it would, run lights out. And it was like, you know what, you could actually try and hone this a little bit. So that's, we started talking about paddock picks and all of that. And now it's really evolved with, you make notes for every horse that comes into the paddock. And that's something a lot of claiming trainers do anyways. You'll see Adam Kitchingman standing at the rail making a note of every horse that walks in, to get what you can and can't physically see from a horse, so you can see how they change. And, all the stuff on your iPad now makes that so easy that you just jot a note, and then next time the horse runs, you pull up the note, and then you can see as that horse kind of changes or doesn't change, or what develops. So I think that the technology has really helped that along, which is funny because you're talking about something as simple as looking at a horse, and it's just a lot harder to write down notes and in paper and go back through, but you have them on your iPad and you pull them up and it's no problem. I think for people that are trying to get into it, the two things I would be leery of is saying something like, oh, that Bob Baffert horse looks good. Yeah, the Bob Baffert horses are going to look good. So, don't pick a Bob Baffert that looks good, because they all look good. You want to find out one that might look exceptionally good, which will be hard to find. Or you want to find the one that's scrawny and be like, check him out. That one does not look like Bob Baffert brought that horse over, So there are those barns, there's like 5 or 6 of those barns. The horses always look good. And controversially, there's some of those barns, the horses always look a little ratty. Their manes aren't pulled. Their, coats never glisten, but their horses still run at, this level. So keep that in mind as well, and don't check a horse out because of that. The other thing is, I would say keep your own notes. If you follow one track really closely, and you don't have to know every horse, which some people definitely do. I know Maggie Wolfendale is writing down a note on every horse. When the horses come over at Santa Anita, I try to write a note on every horse, whether it be how they come over, what they're doing, or a bit, whatever it is. So then I can go back and reference, oh, was this horse like this? Was he like that? If you're just following one track, you can kind of do at least something that sticks out to you. If a horse is screaming and shouting in the paddock, well, write that down. And the next time he runs, if he runs good and he is or is not doing it next time, you can go back. And that's how you kind of start building your own like mental database of some of these horses. And, there's so many horses now that we see if you follow just one track time and time again. And we just know, oh, that horse is always sweaty, or this horse is always worked up, or, something along those lines. And you can really use that to know right away if this horse is going to be playable today or not from a physical standpoint.
I think that's some great points there. Looking at the horse through the lens of the barn, that's terrific. Bill Mott's another one I would give that to.
Yes,
like
Rasmussen.
Yeah, they all look good. They're and just because one looks good doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to be jumping on it that day. I think sometimes you could see maybe subtle things in terms of fitness with those runners, but they all need to be viewed through that prism. And then that idea of changes, because what's negative and positive, in my experience looking at horses, can almost flip. The classic example being Shackelford. I don't know if you remember what he looked like before. He was sweaty mess when he'd run well, and if he was dry, look out, something's not right. He doesn't have his game face on.
That is exactly right. That is like one of the best horses to reference off the top of your head, is a horse like that needed to be hot and bothered to run a good race.
What do you think in terms of, we're talking about when a horse looks good as if that's just something everybody can see. For you, is it more of like it's so flaky sounding, but for me, there's aspects of it that are almost like sixth sensey about like how a horse might look. I mean, there's things that glare out one way or another, but there's a whole giant range in the middle where I hate to say you get a feeling, but it's something that's just very hard to put into words when a horse looks balanced and ready to run beyond a few obvious signs. Do you think it's something that can be taught by one person to another, or is it really the kind of thing where you just have to go to the paddock, especially to see the better horses time and time again, and it starts to like ooze into you?
I mean, I think it's definitely something that can be taught, although it does take a lot of looking at horses. You have to look at a lot of horses before you can start to see stuff. The good news is like a lot of the physical things that you want to see from a horse, it doesn't matter once they're racing. It doesn't matter, if this horse is running in a grade 1 and his leg's on a little crooked, it don't matter. He's gotten himself there running on a crooked leg. So you don't need to really worry about the physical aspects of that. What I'm looking for is muscle tone. I want to see a fitness line on their belly. And that is something that when two horses are standing next to each other, one that has it and one that doesn't, is glaringly visible. I think dapples is the easiest thing to teach someone. And, it might not play as much in winter when a lot of horses are either body clipped or they have on winter coats. But, for the vast majority of spring and definitely all of summer, you want to look for those big, lighter colored spots on their coat. And once you point out a dapple to someone, they can pick them out all the time. That's the easiest thing to show someone from a visible standpoint. And a lot of the stuff is silly, right? Like, I like to see a pulled mane. I like a braided mane. I like to have the ears clipped. And when horses come over and they're not clipped and ready, I'm like, and that's really trainer preference, right? It doesn't make them run faster to have their ears clipped. I just think it looks better overall, and it helps make them look more composed. So I do look for that.
Those are great examples of things that folks can look for. Absolutely. And let me ask you one more looks question, then we'll move on to other matters. For me, I find it, and obviously I've tried to change this and do better with looking at a screen, but I find physically being in the presence of them makes a lot of these things, whether it's the conditioning muscle underneath or the little dimple behind the saddle, the Tootsie Roll thing that Bonnie Ledbetter described years ago. I see it much better in person, and I judge horses relative to the group that they're in much better in person than I can on the screen. Is your eye such where you can use some of these techniques on screen, or is it all about being in the flesh for you as well?
Nope. I mean, I'm more than happy. A lot of times, actually, we'll sit and watch Saratoga with no PPs or anything because the kids are sleeping and my arms are full, and I'll be like, right, go bet the 6. He looks good in the paddock, So we definitely can play off the look situation, and in that aspect too, it's how they carry themselves. Are they on the toes a little bit and feeling like a coiled spring? Are they just kind of lackadaisical with their ears sideways and floppy? I mean, you look for a lot of that body language too. And it does make it harder when you can't see every horse. That's the bad thing about when it's on screen, right? Is you're at the mercy of whoever is controlling the camera. And if there's a favorite in there, then we're going to want to stick to that horse where you're like, let's pan through. I want to see every horse out there. And the most annoying thing is in the post parade, when they show the post parade and the pony horses block everything.
Oh, that's the worst.
Oh, the pony horse. I want to see the horses warm up.
I love you mentioned those little things you can see. One that you can definitely see on TV, that rocking horse motion that they'll sometimes do, where it's like they can't wait. In that controlled energy that communicates. I love that one, and that's one that I think almost anybody could see, even on a screen. So we only have you for a few more minutes because I know you are about to go and record your podcast. I want you to give a chance to tell the folks viewing this on the Breeders' Cup Facebook page and through their Twitter account as well as those listening on in the Money Media Network, where they can find what is. Give us a description of the show and let folks know where they can find it.
Well, I do a show called The Horse Ownership Experience. Actually, my partner is up here in Veranda North in these brown apartments up here. It's Billy Koch. He was just calling me on their line. He probably wants to know where the heck I am.
Blame it on, throw me under the bus. Billy will. He knows that I'm a troublemaker. I've sat with him on the veranda with our buddy Benny South Street, and he knows I'm trouble. So you can just blame me.
Up here is where Billy is staying. Like he's in this condo that you can see half of the track from the balcony. Oh, so he put a TV on the other half so that the part that's blocked they watch on TV and then they watch half of it live. So Veranda is up there. But our show is called The Horse Ownership Experience, and we talk to different horse owners or people that would be involved in what you might need as a tool to own horses. So bloodstock agents, we've talked to vets, we've talked to pinhookers, stuff like that. So we're not calling, a trainer and be like, let's talk about your horse, about handicapping. We are about educating and informing people that might want to get into the ownership game, because we need owners in this game. And, we try and have on everyone from every walk of life, everyone that's from the sheikhs all the way down to Joe Schmo, who owns half of a percent of one claiming horse, so we talk to a little bit of everybody and get their stories and just what they like and what they didn't and what they thought was helpful and what wasn't, and how we can help improve racing. We do a little bit of what's going on in the racing world, a little mini recap and what's up and coming. But overall, it's really about educating and informing and keeping it super positive on our show.
Well, Billy does such a great job. All the work that he and Gary Fenton have done over at Little Red Feather certainly made great strides for bringing people into the game for, almost a couple of decades now. Yeah. And it's great that he's doing that audio version of it. I've been remiss in not checking it out, but I will. And iTunes, the best place to get it. Do you have a website that people can check out? What would you recommend?
We do. We hit the ownahorsepodcast.com is our website, but you can find it on Apple, on Stitcher. It's on, iTunes. It's on Twitter. We have a Twitter handle. It's at ownahorse. And then we tweet out every week our show, so you can find it right from there. I mean, it's pretty much anywhere that the iPod or that podcast get delivered, it gets sent to. I just saw Amazon Music is going to be doing podcasts, so I'm going to get it up on there as well. Fantastic.
Good stuff. So you're involved in that's another conversation we could have. You're involved in the marketing and production end of this thing as well, it sounds like.
Well, I mean, I push send on my phone. That's about as far as it goes.
I really was planning on holding your feet to the fire and seeing if you could do an encore of the impromptu race call, but you didn't look like you were in the right setting to.
I know. You know what? My kids are in there, and if I went inside the house and turned on a TV, they would be all over it. Otherwise, I totally would. Anytime that I'm on, that there's a race call to be had, I will totally do it. I'm all for it.
It was pro quality. I couldn't believe you had studied the race to do it. That you did it like that off the cuff was amazing. All right. I know you've got places to go. I don't want to get you in more trouble with Billy. I don't want to get in more trouble with Billy. I won't be invited back to the veranda anytime soon. But Michelle, thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to chatting with you again in the very near future, hopefully to call a race.
Thanks, Pete. Next time for sure, we'll call a race. You can randomly select me a track and we'll get it done.
Now you're tempting me to be a little naughty and give you something particularly. You're going to be doing a 20-horse field in Australia if you're not careful.
Yeah, right. That's all right. They won't even know if I screw up those names or not.
Michelle, thank you so much.
Thanks, Pete.
Excellent. All right, good stuff. We've got a few minutes left on the show. We just had our penultimate contest race, Saratoga's 8th, and the leaderboard remains largely unchanged at the top. And looks well. We'll have to see some of the numbers underneath, but I'm seeing a whole lot of threes for people selecting in this ninth race at Saratoga that goes in about 19 minutes. I'll do a quick recap, and then we will bring in our final guest to offer another perspective on this weekend's win. And you're in Alabama. Number 1 on the leaderboard, Caleb Knight. Number 2, Peter Rotundo Sr. Number 3, Bob Schreiter, still in 3rd place. Oh, I just noticed, Bob Schreiter, team play all the threes. And, I always applaud in a charity contest. Now, people might want to get annoyed at somebody playing all one number, but not in a charity contest. This means Bob Schreiter was happy to make a donation, presumably didn't have time to handicap, played all the threes, and may just get rewarded with a seat to Saturday's Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge qualifier. So good on him for that. We'll see if he can hang around. And then we've got 2 in-the-money regulars. Sam Stinson's been asking great questions on the show and challenging us to head-to-heads for jelly beans and direct messages for years. He is in 4th with 5170, tied with ITM regular Matt Bagvolgi, who's overdue to get back on the airwaves. We tried to hook him up as a Brentwood guest one day. It did not work out. We will get him there before the end of the summer. But now I'm looking down at the name that's 7th on this list here, and we actually have him on the line right now. We've got a lot to talk about with our friend making his return to the In the Money airwaves, Lou Mazzarelli. Lou, how are you today, my man?
Good. We're doing good. We hit the nice price on the turf a couple of races ago. I actually had some win money on that guy.
Good.
Came up late. Looking good in the contest. Looks like everybody's hot on Mrs. Orb. Lots of speed in that race. So we'll see. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm trying to do a little quickie math here and see what you're going to be looking at. You'll be getting, 15 or so if this 3 wins. That might just put you, that should put you above Matt Bagvolgi, who played the 4. You could, Sam Stinson has the big odds-on favorite here. The place points from that could potentially pip you, but I think you'd be okay. So I think you are drawing live with the 3 here in this last race at Saratoga. I didn't prep you to talk about these races, and we've been doing a little bit different format today. We've been just sort of, chatting and not really talking about the races such as they are. But because this is our last race of the contest, and we have some drama, and we have you on the line, if you don't mind, pull up your PPs and give us your breakdown of this race. Was this, first of all, anytime there's a big favorite like Radikowski in this spot, I have to ask, was this one that you picked because of the price, or is this the horse you quote-unquote like in this spot?
Well, I really liked your last race. I thought that you ran a great race, and here you got more speed than you even had last time. Obviously Radikowski's going to go, and then you have the 2 outside horses that are going to show speed as well. I mean, with Carrera Cat and Newly Minted. I mean, we don't know exactly what we're going to get from Newly Minted. She's coming off a layoff, but Mrs. Orb likes to come from behind. She's cutting back from 1 mile to 7. I like that change on her. She was really, ahead behind her last time. So maybe if we get a little bit more pace pressure on Radikowski with Carrera Cat and Newly Minted, maybe Mrs. Orb gets the trip and can actually come running and do some damage here. So that's kind of what I liked. I mean, already I think you're getting a little bit of my flavor. I don't really like the heavy favorite in the contest. I can't play the 1-to-1 in the last race. So yeah, I mean, even with the place points, I might be okay, but probably not. But it's been a lot of fun as usual. These Horseplayer Happy Hours are unbelievable. They're tremendous. So
thank you. You've been a big supporter, which I appreciate. Yeah, for what it's worth. Now I picked Newly Minted, but I'm wondering if this is a little bit cold in the market for a layoff runner. I wonder if that's not telling something. But I am with you that I think Radikowski, who I'm generally a big fan of, and I'm not just talking about the Blurred Lines video, generally a huge Radikowski fan, I just think it's a little bit of a tricky situation here potentially, as you mentioned, pace-wise. So I love Mrs. Orb to come running. I'd be messing around with the 3 and the 6, and I wouldn't have Radikowski any worse than second. But that would be my general approach to this race. But the real race that I have you on to talk about is not the 9th race at Saratoga on Thursday. It is, I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but I'm hoping it's just for the smooth segue, the 9th race at Saratoga on Saturday. I'm talking about the Grade 1 Alabama, and it does go as race 9. How convenient.
Yeah.
You, of course, are very involved with Winstar Stablemates. You came on after that amazing CCA Oaks, where you got to watch your two fillies going head and head in the stretch. It's Crystal Ball who comes back to the races here. When you originally thought about the Alabama for Crystal Ball, were you thinking you were going to see Swiss Skydiver lined up against you?
No, it's funny because I pulled back one of the DRF articles on the Bluegrass, and Kenny actually said at that point, and I didn't read the article, that Swiss Skydiver was going to head that way. He had predicted that back after that race, and it's not something I was really aware of. I'll be honest with you. Rennie was fantastic, by the way. I love hearing his perspective on things. And I'm actually not doing any of the brown stuff, by the way. I'm doing a Moscow Mule today, just because I like.
You've got the right cup for the Moscow Mule.
Yeah.
I'd toast you, but my beer is empty, and that would be bad luck. But that's a gorgeous little mule tin. So
I love it.
Good stuff.
So I didn't expect it, but I know what she's being looked at as. She's being looked at as pace, basically, here. I mean, she's showing a lot of pace, but I think, obviously, when you're an owner, you're so attached to your horses. But I've seen all of her works on XBTV, and actually not the most recent work from Saratoga. And she is a pit bull. She will not give up, basically. This is a horse that just doesn't want to. She'll latch onto you, and she won't get off you. And, like I said to you before, I mean, Bob liked to work her with Charlatan. He's worked her with some really, it's just been fantastic who she's kept company with as time goes by. Another really talented filly that's set to make her debut. I love her at 10 furlongs. She's a huge filly, and she's just going to keep coming. The same way she kept coming in the Coaching Club Oaks. I'm not remotely concerned about the 10 furlongs for her. I know Crystal Ball has talent. I equally understand Swiss Skydiver is awesome. But maybe she's tapped out. I mean, I think we may have seen her roof, in the high 90s. Whereas Crystal Ball, we're looking at the fourth start on a relatively unraced filly. I mean, she went from maiden to grade 1 race, and she ran a heck of a race. I know the buyer wasn't particularly strong, but I love speed on the front end at distance. I think, we've seen that at the Belmont every year. It's pretty powerful in the Derby. At 10 furlongs, I don't want a deep closer. I never do. And, some of these other horses are really nice. I mean, no question about that. Spice is nice. I mean, you can't get better breeding than that, right, Curlin? And then you got the Dame Dorothy on the bottom for over $1 million. But, she's kind of coming off a little bit of a layoff. So I really love where we're sitting. And you know what? If I get more than 5-1, I'll be ecstatic, which I think I will, because, Swiss Skydiver is going out at 2-5, maybe 1-5. I don't know.
It's going to be an odds-on situation for Swiss Skydiver. You talked about the workouts. That's one thing. I think if I were to build a case for Crystal Ball, the workouts would be a big part of it. Because now I don't have a workout report here, but just as somebody who's used to just looking at and interpreting works, it just seems like these 3 works, for me, the way I look at the world, progressively better, which I love to see. 4 furlong kind of maintenance-y work. Then there was the slower 5 furlong. But then where she may have tipped her hand about a forward move in form, the 5 furlongs in a minute 1, that's that angle we've talked about a lot. That in Barry Meadows' book, when he and Ken Massa of HTR did all these computer studies about horse racing, a factor that made almost every stat look better is if it was accompanied by that fast 5 furlong workout sometime in I think it's the previous 2 works before the race. You'll see horses outrun their odds a whole lot when they have that. So I was very interested. What would you like? I'm sure you defer to connections in these matters, but what would you like to see in terms of trip? Where would you like to be sitting vis-a-vis Swiss Skydiver if you had your way?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of a little giddy up on that work. What was really interesting to me was that she just did it 2 days ago. I just felt that to be really interesting. I'd love to know what Bob's thinking about that, because a lot of the syndicate owners were like, wow, why is she working not 5 days before work or 4 days before work, 5 furlongs, at a minute. So I think honestly she's coming up on a really big race. No, of course you always do when you're an owner, but ideally, honestly, she's best on the lead or near the lead. I mean, she's going to sit on or near Swiss Skydiver, and the question is going to be whether or not this $750,000 filly is better than those numbers suggest from her previous 3 races, and whether or not again, I love her physicality. I like a big horse going 10 furlongs, and she's just a grinder. So she'll grind out the 12 and a half, 13s. She's not going to wow you with a subpar 24 last, 2 furlongs like you had with Spice is Nice, right? I mean, that's why in her last race, I mean, she really, she really came home strong, and I think that a lot of cappers are going to go to her for that. But yeah, I'd like to see her on. She won't do so well from behind, I don't think. It's not where she's accustomed to running. Although there were a couple of really great works that she's been breaking out of the gate has been a little bit of an issue for her. But the last couple of races, not an issue. And I hope Javier can really work out a nice trip. She's from the 3-hole. It's not a big field, so I don't see why not. And you got to be excited. Like we talked about before, if you're in the syndicate game, if you're that 1% owner, which we are, when we're Winstar Stablemate Connections, I mean, this is our 4th grade 1 attempt at the Spa. I mean, and we have a first, a second, and Abounding Joy ran a great race for her. I mean, she wasn't beating, she wasn't that race was really a tough race, obviously, and no one even expected, her to finish more than 3rd anyway, but. And now we have our 4th grade 1 start. I mean, you can't, I don't know what you can expect for when you kind of join up for a syndicate. So it's been a dream, Pete.
I know you get some fun and dealing with our buddy, another in the money friend who's going to be back on the airwaves extremely soon, Sean Tugel. I know he's had a new addition to the family. Has he still been as involved as ever in Winstar Stablemates?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I text him all the time. Bad beats, good beats. Actually, he gives me a little insight on some of the Winstar horses. Yeah, he's super involved. I mean, I think it's his direction with Aaron that really have driven the syndicate to really great heights this year. We're very lucky. There's been a huge amount of interest in it just because of the success that we've had recently. Like I said to you, and this is true for all the fans. I mean, it's absolutely killing me. I mean, not to be there this weekend. I mean, this is when we should have been at the sales. We should be going to 15 Church. I mean, this is this is what we should be doing. And I'm having the time of my life with my family here. They're visiting, but it's not the Spa. And it's not sitting in the paddock waiting for your horse to run in a grade 1 race. And nonetheless, the Alabama, one of the most historic races in the history of the world. I mean, there was some great Twitter stuff about Go for One. I love the history of the game, And it's not that we're not comparing my horse to Go for One, but the fact that she won the test and then 8 days later came back and ran I think it was 2 minutes and 1 second. I mean, what a time. Could you imagine, 10 furlongs, 8 days later, and Go for One comes and she blows them out of the water in the Alabama. I mean, there's some great fillies. So to have the opportunity to kind of be in this race that has so much history is just a tremendous honor in and of itself. I mean, that alone is incredible.
Yeah, you've got the right attitude about it. Of course, it's a little bittersweet because you want to be there, but there'll be other years for that for sure. And we're certainly wishing you Godspeed. It's a tough task with that Swiss skydiver in there. Sure. But very excited to see how you do and hoping for a big effort on Saturday. Have you had a chance to look at any of the other races on Saturday yet? How, in your own handicapping, do you? I mean, I know you're a dyed-in-the-wool horse player. At what point, obviously you've handicapped this race thoroughly, but at what point do you take a look at the surrounding races?
Yeah, I started looking at the card actually. I was not to, today was a great day actually, because we had last time we spoke and we talked about Robin Sparkle and she really,
yes.
I mean, that was kind of what I was expecting. Unfortunately, last time she was 20-1. Today I got 3-1. But it's so funny because a lot of these horses are circling around that actually we spoke about the last time, like in the finale. For example, I mean, the horse that I had liked last time, actually, Operative, I thought ran really well, actually, just before, to finish 3rd. But we have some of the same horses that we saw last time, including Bricko. And we also get another chance with Mommy's Jewel, the gemologist for the Generazios, actually. So I've been looking, you really want to find some prices. I'll tell you what, Pete, Saturday's card is fantastic. I mean, there's tons of great races because you got some maiden races that are wide open. at the beginning of the card, and then I don't think you really have a lot of standouts actually. I mean, of course, why don't we, if you have a couple of seconds, we could talk a little bit about the Decorated Invader race.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we've got 4 minutes to post, so we're going to watch this race, and then we'll recap the contest and get out of here. So let's do it. I'll just put in a quick thought because we'll go in order with the 7th race.
Sure.
Is one where I had just a horse on the watch list that I loved last time and ran too well, in my opinion, not to win, and that was Jimmy Jazz, who made that move maybe a little early into the hot pace. I think IRAD suits this one to a T, and I'm looking to maybe play some pick threes, starting with Jimmy Jazz in the 7th, then getting into the Saratoga Derby, the Decorated Invader spot that you mentioned, and closing out in the Alabama. So what do you think is going to happen? Is Decorated Invader, is this a one-horse race for you? Or
yeah, no, actually, I really loved and just I got to say this because you know already a little bit, because I don't know why I always have to bring Let It Ride back into this, but I finally got a chance to bet the same as my cat, because my cat's name is Jack, and I think Jack the cat honestly may get the trip today. I like him a lot, and I definitely respect your point. But no, I'll tell you what, you can ask for more than what Decorator Invader's done, but I love this. I love Colonel Williams' last race. I thought this horse showed tremendous talent. I mean, first time on the grass. I love what I saw. I love the race. I love the physicality of the horse. I love the way he ran. I think he's going to give Decorated Invader a little bit of a run for his money. We're not getting a lot of a price here, but I certainly wouldn't just single Decorated Invader here. I would use a little Colonel Liam for sure.
I'm with you, actually. I mean, I'm going to weight it pretty heavily towards Decorated Invader, but Colonel Liam is the one I want as a backup. It's a really interesting instance where I've looked at 4 different speed figures for this race, and they're all kind of different. And Beyer is the most bullish, which just does make me wonder, having that 100 Beyer speed figure staring folks betting in the face, if Colonel Liam isn't going to be the 7-2 in the morning line. As a long shot, I'd absolutely love this horse, but it's an angle I talk about all the time, how much I love it. When they step on grass and they improve their figure significantly, it's often the market assumes, just looking at the raw numbers, that you might see a horse back up off a big new top, big new peak. And it's rarely the case when that was their first time on turf. I feel like these horses typically just continue to move forward. I think Decorated Invader will win. And in fact, I did in a head-to-head with JK take Decorated Invader, but in my own betting, I'm going to be playing Jimmy Jazz into both of these two, and then into the Alabama. So I'm definitely with you that Colonel Liam, a very interesting item in there, and may have a tactical advantage. I mean, looking at the time form pace projector anyway, does project to be significantly out in front. Now, sometimes that tends to even itself out at a mile and 3/16 on the Saratoga turf, but we'll see what happens. It's going to be it's a heck of a horse race.
It'll be interesting. I think so too. That's another pricey call too at over $1 million. You have two horses basically in nearing races that are over $1 million on the price tag. So it's always interesting, actually.
I love to see that work out. When people are willing to take chances and get involved. And the Lows have certainly done this before, often in tandem with another very good friend and bloodstock agent, Jacob West. It's good to see them get rewarded and have these horses competing on the biggest stages, graded stakes races on Saturdays at Saratoga. I want to, unless you have another handicapping thought, I want to just talk a little bit about your background story, and I'm always interested to hear how people first, how their love of the game began, and then for you, I want to hear how that passion for thoroughbred racing translated from being a fan and a bettor to an owner. If you have a minute, we could actually talk right through the race. So we've got a few minutes to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up around Aqueduct. We would spend a lot of weekends and weekdays basically going to Aqueduct. I literally could walk to the track. And my grandmother worked actually for a couple of years in the accounting office, and we would go up to Saratoga. And, the memories were always great. I mean, meeting Howard Cosell, he was getting his shoes shined, and just kind of going up to him and saying hello. And a couple of the exercise riders would come over the house. They were characters, a lot of them, and they would have dinner with us. And I loved it. I just loved the energy. And everybody in my house, I mean, it's just part of the genetics. I honestly know it's part of the genetics. I mean, if I did a 23andMe, I'm sure horse degenerate basically would have to be one of the things that might come up basically.
Hey, you've got the shirt for it too.
Well, we almost paired each other today, Pete, because I just came back from my father-in-law's place because I left it there actually because I had to buy it after the big pick 5 hit. By the way, I almost hit for the 55 on my birthday. Actually, I underfinanced that one, and then I got taken down with Sadler's Joy actually. So it's been bittersweet, but also fantastic. But and then again, education got in the way of my passion for racing when I was going through medical school and then residency. It was hard to kind of get it in, although it was always in the background somewhere. And then I went up to Saratoga about 11 years ago with some family, and I just said, "Oh my God, how did I get away from this?" I just absolutely fell in love with it, and then it just, not that it wasn't enough, but Richie Migliore did those fantastic owner seminars.
Those were great.
And those were fantastic. You'd spend the day basically learning about races. You had great speakers like Linda Rice, and then you had. You got to meet some, like Roddy Valenti was there, and they were just some great people. And then I got one of my idols, Steve Beck, who I absolutely love as well.
Steve is fantastic.
I just got to, and actually the day that we were there, one of his horse actually won for Gary Siaka. So it was actually really fun. So we took the photo in there, and actually Jack Knowlton was there that day. So I met Jack, and I remember talking to Jack, and Jack was telling me how basically he's allergic to horses, so that was kind of funny as well actually. And then
ironic, no doubt.
I was looking for an entry point, and it had to be reasonable. I didn't want to do something that was too invested in one horse. And this was a great opportunity. It was like a mutual fund of some of the best horses, bloodstock that I'd never be able to afford on my own, and that's how I did it. And I was very lucky when I got the email, and it's been a dream since. I mean, it really has. It's been so much fun, Pete, and I got to talk about horses that I've loved basically. So it's been really awesome, really awesome.
This is a bit of a wild race at Saratoga.
Yeah, what are we doing here? I'm throwing the glasses on.
You're still coming, and you might get me. I'm on Newly Minted on the lead. I think you're going to run second. I think it's going to come 6-3. The race didn't play out exactly like we thought. Radikowski didn't really break and then made a menacing move. The money did come for Newly Minted late. Hopefully I didn't talk anybody off with that observation about the tepidity in the betting. But in the end, I think we can call that giving the people the exacta with my horse over your horse here in the 9th race at Saratoga. I don't think the place points are going to get you there, but we'll see in a minute. Maybe. But the other thing is, in this contest, there will be some breakage points as well. So if you get site credit, maybe you can come back and play next week. 100%. And I want to encourage people listening. It's a little harder when the contest starts an hour before the broadcast. I recognize that. Unfortunately, as busy as Saratoga is, the days of our ability to do 2.5-hour live shows, it's just a bit much. So we've decided to condense them, make them more like weekend preview shows, and we're going to do a better job pumping it up through our social media and letting people know that they can get involved. I know, we might not see the crazy numbers we were seeing when it was the only thing cooking a few months ago, and there's nothing wrong with the amount of people who play, but I want to get more and more people playing, so start thinking about it now. Mark your calendars, folks. It'll be approximately 3 o'clock next Thursday, Horseplayers Happy Hour, to benefit the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance and the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. And obviously, we're having a lot of fun. You play, you support a great cause, you watch along, and I want to start having some competitors on, too. One of my other guest ideas for this week, Brad Anderson, the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge winner, won the feeder last week. He was out playing golf today. I told him that was a pretty good excuse. And it worked out great because what a fantastic array of guests we have. I want to make you show off your T-shirt one more time. I'm going to be very self-serving.
And I'm telling you, Pete, this T-shirt honestly is a showstopper. I mean, my wife and I, she was yelling at me. She's like, you got to stop wearing this T-shirt because people keep stopping you. And this guy, he was in his car basically. And he's like, where did you get that T-shirt? I said, you got to go to Old Smoke. You got to go to the in the money, and then you got to get your degenerate horse player T-shirt.
Awesome.
And
there's an inquiry at Saratoga, by the way. This might not be over. Now, I didn't see it. Are they saying?
No, we were talking. Yeah,
let's see if it's what stage this is.
She's such an interesting horse because she's always coming. It's like if it's 7 furlongs or and she I really like Mrs. Orb. I think she's multi-talented. You know, she went from turf to dirt, and I didn't see it. Let's take a look at what happened here.
Definitely newly minted, shuts off Radikowski. I want to see it on a head-on. It does look like Radikowski's coming again, and the jock, Lizcano, is hitting left-handed out in front. And I certainly think you can argue that this cost Radikowski a placing, potentially. It's a very much a pull-up. Here's the head-on.
The way they've been calling it, Pete, honestly, and a couple of DQs that I've been involved with, it's really no different. I mean, those lanes are really powerful when you see the lanes, actually, and it really is costing, when it costs a placing, they've been taking them down. I've never been one to be too critical on the stewards because it's such a tough job. But the consistency is not always there. And I think, even with Sadler's Joy, obviously I had a lot of skin in the game that day. I had that pick 5 multiple times. And honestly, getting taken down really hurt. But it was, I thought it was kind of a similar lane shift there. It was obviously going towards the inside rail, not the outside.
I think what happened with Sadler's Joy, I think if it was just Sadler's Joy shutting off the 4, it would have stayed. But the fact that caused a chain reaction that bumped the other horse, it's still, you could debate if that horse was going to get, a better placing anyway, which is why I hate the Category 2 rules that we have, because it asks the stewards to play God in like a really difficult and unfair way. But I think that's what cost you there. This, I think what they're going to eventually look at, it's not going to be easy to see, is if newly minted is clear. They're clipping heels there. There's probably contact. I think this one, even though it's going to hurt my bank account, I think this one's going to have to come down.
Well, when you see a horse steady like that, and obviously, Radikowski is not finishing in 5th place basically, or 6th place, whatever here. She steadied pretty hard, and it cost her a placing. Now, I believe that's the rule, though, right? If it cost her placing,
they're supposed to take it down. Though they could judge. Let's say he was a length clear, and the jockey did that. They're not going to give it to you for that. But it looks to me like they're in tight enough that that's going to happen. Back to the T-shirt for 1 second. I have a story about that when we sweat this inquiry. We did. Our business manager Drew Coatney on the In the Money Network. He's the greatest, and he did mention that concern. I guess his wife had seen an early draft of the shirt and was like, "Are you really going to sell this?" Like, people calling themselves degenerates. Like, if you're not like in the club, you don't realize what a badge of honor it is. And that this was one of the times where Drew raised the concern, and I had to tell him. This is one of those instances where you're being like, Murray in Flight of the Conchords. You're just being too straight, and you got to let us goofballs dictate what happens here. And it's become a very popular item, as you mentioned. OldSmokeClothing.com. Actually, the easiest way to find it these days, inthemoneypodcast.com/oldsmoke, and you use that promo code.
No change.
I see, no change. Well, good for me, and I wouldn't mind hearing an explanation. It surprises me, but you know what? I've been taken down so many times that I'll take the luck. Hopefully, it didn't. It probably did cost you, unfortunately.
No, this is the thing. Like I said, the opening day pick 5 I hit was because of the DQ, and that may have been a big questionable DQ, because the winner of that race, actually, who was taken down, I don't even know. And
I didn't
gone
love
both
that
ways.
DQ. I didn't tell you this when you mentioned it to me on the show, because I didn't want to be raining on your parade, and what a parade it was. But that one was kind of questionable. So in theory, it works out. Half the time it hurts you, half the time it helps you. I feel like as horse players, we feel like it's 80-20, bad to good at best with these DQs. But of course, that's not actually possible. Oh, we might have lost Lou, but we were done anyway, so that's okay. We'll let Lou go. Hopefully he's not upset about getting pipped on the wire via that DQ. I'm going to recap the leaderboard, and we're going to close things out. As was most of the day, Caleb Knight ends up in first with 81.60. Peter F. Rotundo, Peter Sr. in second with 77. Bob Schreiter, Mr. All the Threes, picks up some more place points there with his threes and ends on 66.50. Sam Stinson in fourth, 51.70. Matt Bagvolgi, also 51.70, ends up in fifth place. Shorter the rest. Hopefully, there's some breakage. So the likes of Michael Webb, Lou Mazzarelli, Robert Donati, and Nancy Spence, I believe, get money to play another day, presumably next Thursday, if not before, on this Horseplayers Happy Hour. What fun this was today. I should have shouted out Matt Bernier before. I guess I did a little, but we thank him in absentia. He's just a critical part of these shows and just been a phenomenal broadcast partner to have back since we started the Place with the Letters podcast in 2014. He's missed terribly, and we would love to have him back as soon as next week. But in his absence, I feel like we did pretty well. Randy Moss, that was fabulous storytelling and just some great insight into figure making from him. Michelle Yu, just tremendous, always such a great energy, good stories herself, and great stuff about looking at horses in the paddock. Lou Mazzarelli bringing us his ownership experience, giving his perspective on this weekend's Alabama. Just great stuff all around. So we thank them. We thank our friends at the Breeders' Cup. We thank our charity partners, the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance and the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. Of course, you can give to them directly. Easiest way to do that, at least in the case of the TRF, is through another page off our, connected with us, trfinc.org/players. There's also a special party. If you're a Saratoga area listener or you know someone who's in the Saratoga area, we're doing this little VIP viewing party at Taverna Novo on Sunday. Come join us. It's going to be, starting at 1, going to the end of the races, and it's safe. It's socially distanced. We have a very limited number of seats. You basically make a donation, and you get invited to this thing, and then it's cash bar and food. But it's going to be an absolute ton of fun. I will be there the whole day. There'll be some special guests flying around, presumably, and I'm really looking forward to that. trfinc.org/players. Most of all, as ever, we thank you, the viewers, the listeners, for making this Horseplayer Happy Hour so much fun and for everything we're doing over at InTheMoneyPodcast.com. Remember to stay tuned. We're going to have a little break, and then at 6 o'clock, we've got Cocktails and Conversation. We've got Brittany Urton. We've got Nick Luck. We've got Kenny McPeak, and that's going to be always worth watching, and keep the good vibes going on this Thursday as we finish up Saratoga and head straight into Del Mar. That's going to do it. This show's been a co-production of the Breeders' Cup and In the Money Media. As far as In the Money Media goes, our business manager is Drew Coatney. Our chief creative officer is Jonathan Kinchin. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.